So the first half is sort of our interpretation of what some of the key changes that have occurred in the last decade. And this is stuff we've been writing about for a very, very long time, but we just keep refining our ideas. And it's basically what's happened in the shift from analog to digital and how technology has transformed the lives of consumers. And we think that there's a symbiotic relationship between technology and advertising that's been around forever. We've been inside of the paradigm of mass media, which is largely driven by television. And what we've seen with the rise of digital technology is a whole new paradigm. And we don't think the agency business has really fully digested it yet. And so I think we've got a pretty interesting analysis.
Why the second half, which is what I'll be speaking about, is so how do you deal with that as an agency? How do you structure? How do you reimagine, redesign, re-architect an agency? And I talk about very sort of specific things like team. What's the team that you need? What's the process that you need to go about, responding to the why that Barry talks about?
What's the work?
And what's the sort of resulting work? Because you actually work backwards from the work. The first thing you do is figure out what you need to make. Then you curate a team based on what you need to make. And then you have to have this choreographing of many aptitudes to create the work. So the process becomes important just because there's so many people involved. I think anyone who has a craft should always feel threatened, because a craft lives in a context and the context changes constantly, right? So if I was a typesetter in the 80s in London, I should have felt threatened. Despite the fact that my craft was very refined, that I could set type like no one else, and the underlying technology and the sort of structure of the media changed so drastically that I would have been out of work within a few years. So I was in London in the late 80s when everyone was saying that you can never set type on a Mac like you can when you send out for to typesetters. And they were right, but it didn't matter. And I think we're going through the same thing now with sort of classic storytellers in our space, like filmmakers who love telling films in 30 seconds. And because they do it so well, they can't imagine that there wouldn't be a need for it, despite the fact that, again, the underlying structure that keeps that as a sort of viable way of marketing is eroding.
So people lose sight of what the agency business is all about. Just the initial theme of our presentation is like, what do agencies do? Is that we help our clients sell stuff.
Right.
And there was a paradigm for selling stuff that came out of television, which was around mass media, and it worked really, really well, and that's what led to the craft and the level of excellence that it achieved ultimately. But the underlying contexts have changed to the point where that it's forcing a change in the agency business. And the same thing happened in the 50s and 60s, and there's agencies today that were the inheritors of a paradigm that was invented by people like Ogilvy and Bernbach and Leo Burnett. Yeah. And they're the ones that I think figured out how to use creativity in the service of selling goods in that context, the mass media context, the rise of this new technology, which turned out to be television. But we keep getting into these endless debates around what's a big idea, and I think most agencies are pretty focused on the creation of campaigns. That's what mass media afforded us, was campaigns. And it turns out that paradigm of creating campaigns is not necessarily the best opportunity in the digital age. When we do campaigns digitally, I think the average industry click-through rate is about 0.2% for a banner ad. So it's obviously not the best. That's not to say that we should aspire to get 1% or 2% or whatever, but it turns out that consumers aren't terribly interested in campaigns, and they'll turn on pop-up blockers and all kinds of stuff to avoid campaigns. And the very same people who will do that will spend, 1 billion times a day searching on Google for the things that matter to them and what they're interested in. And that's a different paradigm of trying to figure out how to meet the needs of people and fit in with their life rather than, as Nick says, breaking through, which was what the paradigm of mass media was all about.
But if you're trying to fit in with people's media habits, then I think you need to build some sort of ongoing platform. To get attention, which you still want to do, because if there are lots of platforms, how people are going to find them, then you might want to do something that breaks through, and sort of stunt sort of work does that sometimes, and that's where you fit into a looser rhythm.
I think stunts are also something that are comfortable for people who are practitioners in the industry. It feels more like entertainment, which is the space in which they've played for decades. So it's easier for them to sell through to a client the idea of a viral video or some sort of a gag thing that you can run for a little while, and then once it runs its course, enough people have seen it, then it sort of wears out. on the other paradigm, I think, is the paradigm of software technology and Silicon Valley and creating things that that look more like Facebook or Twitter or whatever, things that people adopt and use over and over again. One of the themes of our presentation is on one side of the world are stories, whether they be little gags or stunts or whether they be beautiful films like Write the Future, and on the other side is systems, which are things like Facebook and other types of technology-driven platforms that people find useful and they adopt and they put it in their life in a meaningful context to how they want to live. And we staked out an agency business that started more on the system side of creating these platforms. And what we're trying to do is arc our way back to figure out how to bring storytelling into that thing. And that's our model.
And having those things work together.
Right.
That's the trick. Because the storytelling environment is very singular. You have to have a singular vision to protect the idea around the story. And so the agency business is set up from a collaborative point of view to be like a pyramid. You have the creative decision maker and then getting it executed down. Whereas you build platforms sort of opposite way. You know, you figure out feature sets, you have lots of different attitudes working together. It's sort of additive. The idea won't die if you add another thing. So, but how do you get those two cultures working together? The subtractive culture of outbound and the additive culture of sort of interactive
Technology, right?
So there's that's been one of the challenges, I think.
One other theme is helping clients understand the investment model of digital. Because again, I think they're used to the paradigm of analog advertising where you have to spend a fortune on media. That's what most of our clients spend the lion's share of their money on, no pun intended, lines. It's something in the vicinity of 80% or higher. I think agencies have really been hammered on their fees over the last 10 years, and they've been forced to reduce what they charge for the same services that they were doing a decade ago. But the media companies keep increasing. So the cost of paid media, like television, right now the upfront market was just happening in the United States, which is the big market where all the big broadcasters sell their time. And I think they were able to push through somewhere in the vicinity of 5-6% increase in the middle of a recession. So they keep charging more and more money for smaller and smaller audiences that have eroded through fragmentation of media. They're used to paying exorbitant fees for paid media and hammering agencies and production companies to reduce their costs in terms of the production of ideas. But in our world, we need decent budgets to create things that people actually want to use.
Yes.
But we don't need a whole lot of paid media, and we're often able to deliver greater results with smaller budgets, but the investment paradigm is different. We might use 80% of a client's budget to create a platform and only 20% on a little bit of paid media to create some initial awareness, and then we can rely more heavily on all of the unpaid media that the digital age affords us, people sharing things back and forth, etc., relying on distribution channels like YouTube, where there's no media cost to reach a consumer.
We have a whole industry that it works in this sort of habitual way, and you know, I see it when I work, you know, with creatives, that they get a brief and there is a Pavlovian response to that brief, rather than taking your skill set and try to sort of retrofit it into the current environment. Look at the environment, and you know, and put a square peg in a square hole.
We've seen a lot of marketing problems with commoditized products and services where, you know, spending more money on mass media is not going to get the return on investment. And so instead, what needs to happen is that the product or the category needs to be innovated.
Innovate a service around the product.
Right.
You know, you can extend the product with software in a way that would distinguish it from its competitors. There'll always be a place for those great, just the ideas that tickle you. It's just a lot harder to do that now, you know. So I admire more when that sort of stuff works out, you know. Like, I admire the craft of people like Jerry Graff, who are able to do that time and time again, from just a pure outbound point of view. I just think that it's a hard thing to do for our whole industry, because we're not just up against people getting off their sofa and walking to the bathroom. We're now up against them, you know, peering at their laptop, you know, as they're looking at TV at their mobile device, fast forwarding through the ads, and you have to ask the question: is someone looking to be entertained by a sort of a brand, or are they looking to be entertained by HBO or Universal or even YouTube? But in the past, you didn't have to ask the question why someone was going to, or how someone would find it, because the answer was they were watching the football, or they were watching the EastEnders or whatever, right? And you interrupted them. So, but now you have to ask that question. So, Even the most brilliant outbound message risks being that tree falling in the forest that no one knows about, no matter how good it is.